I am live. I'm reading out of Lord of the Horizon. It is a Joan Marshall Grant far memory book as a life as Ra-Ab, a male in ancient Egypt. I am now in part 3 of this book. Joan Marshall Grant was a seer. She lived until 1989 and she was able to recall previous lives. And this is one of them. We know Ra-Ab already from the eyes of Horus, where they defeated Set and the dark forces. He is now grown-up, married, has 3 children, and is looking after Senusert, who is the son of the Pharaoh, and who's going to be Pharaoh. And he has 3 children. We are now in chapter 8, the half-brothers. Senusert had been staying with Kias and Hanuk in the Jackal, and on his return he said to me, Hanuk was telling me about the journeys he used to make in disguise before the dawn. I realized that although I have lived for a time as a member of most of the principal castes, I have always filled a role already prepared for me, and the people with whom I worked accepted me as one of themselves. Now I want to learn how Egypt receives a man of no caste, who has no village he can speak of as his home, who is without the background of kinsmen. I think I ought to take every opportunity of judging the authority of the different nomarchs. I'm sure that compared with the time before the Watchers came to power, the administration is as sunlight to the murk of a crocodile's larder. Yes, Ra-Ab, but you and Royden have always told me that only by ceaseless vigilance can tranquility be maintained. Many exiles still come to us. Would there be so many if all gnomes were like the Oryx? You are not sure of the North. Remember, they accepted my father only because it was expedient. They did not fight oppression as did the men of the South, nor have they worked so wholeheartedly to keep fear in exile. You wish to go to the north? Yes, and to the royal city. Perhaps as a beggar in the servants' courts I shall come to know more of the worth of my father's nobles than I shall discover when I take my place at court. So Senusert, soon after his 16th birthday, left the Oryx and was away from us for 4 months. The news he brought home with him more than justified his decision to make the journey and proved that Mary and I had been right to overcome our very considerable anxiety in letting him go. If I become Pharaoh, Ra-Ab, he said, and I have a son, he too shall go nameless among my people before I allow him to become co-ruler. I have brought with me a tally, more than 200 names of people who should no longer be allowed to hold their present authority. 200 in 134 days. I should have been appalled to find so many had I not asked for charity only from those who have never been watchers. 70 of those names have proved to me how vital it is that one day Neri should become vizier or vizier, for then the overseers of every estate would be directly responsible to him, both for their people and their herds. It is curious that some people who would be horrified at neglecting a child are callous to their animals. Sometimes those who were generous to me with food had goats which looked half-starved, and a man who gave me a pair of sandals because he noticed that a thong of mine was broken had an ox with a disease of the hooves which must have caused it considerable pain. When I came to the royal gnomes, I went to the kitchen quarters of the houses of the nobles. They never refused food to me, and usually I shared the meal of the lesser household servants. Apart from 3 estates where the servants were unduly apprehensive of their master's temper, or suffered from a mistress too particular about trivialities, I found nothing disquieting to report. When I reached the royal city, I thought it would be interesting to go to the palace. It was the first time I've ever entered the servants' courts, for I was never allowed to go there in my grandmother's time. I offered to pay for my food with labor, and said that I had some skill as a gardener. Rather to my surprise, I was allowed to work in the private gardens. Once my father walked past me, so close that I could have touched him, but I prostrated myself and he did not recognize me. Senusert looked up and his voice took on a new note. It was in the garden that I first saw my half-brother. Did you know that he now lives in the palace, that he occupies the apartments which used to be mine? When I last heard of him, he was living with his mother, not far from the house of Ramoise. I was told they had only recently come to the palace. Did you find an opportunity to speak to him? Yes, while working in the garden I heard him cry out and found he had been stung in the hand by a poisonous spider. I sucked the wound and then treated it as Jan had told me. He was grateful and asked how I, as gardener, had learned such effective measures. I told him that I had not always been a gardener, but had once worked for a man who made elixirs of herbs. What did you think of him? I liked him, Ra-Ab. He's not so tall as I, but in some ways more closely resembles my father, though his brow is wider and his eyes are grey. I pretended to take him for the royal heir and asked, "How soon will it be before you become co-ruler?" He replied, "My father, Pharaoh, has not yet decided. He has another son older than I am. His name is Prince Senusert, and his mother was the royal wife. Some people think he will rule instead of me." "Senusert," I said, pretending to be puzzled. "I've never heard of a Prince Senusert." "Quite a lot of people have forgotten about him," he answered. "I think he is in a temple being trained as a priest. Once pharaohs always used to be priests, you know. They wanted me to go into a temple, but Tet-Hen, he is my father's high priest, said I might take several lives before I was ready for initiation." Then I asked what Senusert was like. He hesitated before answering and then said, "I don't know. I have never seen him. He hasn't lived at the palace for a long time. I once heard one of the servants say about me, 'Let Ptah be thanked he is not like his half-brother.' So I don't think that they can have liked Senusert. I asked my mother about him, but she said it wasn't fair to listen to servants' gossip, and that if Senusert had been a horrid little boy, it was his grandmother's fault." Then he stopped and said, "I don't know why I'm telling you all this," so I said reassuringly, "You let me cut your head and hand and suck out the spider's poison, and that has made us blood-kin for 7 days. So you can say anything you like to me without its being disloyal, and I can do the same to you." "Does it?" he said, looked rather bewildered. I didn't know, but he accepted it, for I expect he wanted someone to talk to as much as I did when I used to live in the palace, someone who treated him as an equal. So I took the risk of asking him why his mother hated Kyosotoris, who had been dead for years. "I don't know. She has never told me. But until Kyosotoris died, my mother was always frightened of something happening to me. I was never allowed to be alone, and mother always slept in my room, except when she came here, which was very seldom. My mother doesn't want me to be pharaoh. She says I should be much happier as a secondary prince." Then I asked if he thought he would be pharaoh, and he said, "I don't know. It depends entirely on what father decides. I don't see him very often, but I don't think he likes Senusert, or he wouldn't have sent him away. Mother is frightened of what may happen to us when Senusert comes back. She says that if he had been trained as a priest, some of the nobles will dislike him more than they dislike father." I said, "Do the nobles dislike Pharaoh?" He looked very uncomfortable and said hurriedly, "I should not have said that. You must forget I ever said such a thing. You understand? Forget it all at once." I laughed and said reassuringly, "It is already forgotten. You need not be afraid. Are we not blood brothers for 7 days?" I did not see him again, but because of what he had told me, I went north the next day to try to find out more in the kitchen quarters of the nomarchs and the more powerful nobles. There is little strength in a blade of grass, but with many grasses you can make a strong rope. From chance phrases, even from the inflection of a voice, though alone they were not important, I learned that there is a strong faction in Egypt which is hoping that my half-brother will become co-ruler. They want him because they think he will be easily influenced by those who have their personal interest at heart, rather than the welfare of the country. Although the tribute, which the nobles now pay, is smaller than it was under the old rule, they would rather see their wealth go to emblazon the court than use to increase the comfort of the common people. They resent the simplicity in which my father lives, and would like once again to see the royal treasures squandered on those lavish displays which were supposed to mollify the people under the old rule. They would prefer to go to a temple where, provided their tribute was lavish, they were promised the favor of the gods, than to be told, as they are by our priests, that no one can enter the field of Ra except by the value of a heart burnished by its own extortions. They are less convinced by a prince who is in complete simplicity can cure their sickness than they used to be by those who masqueraded in the temples and whose rituals was a lamp which burned no oil of truth. But why, Senusert, are the nobles dissatisfied? Under the old rule they had to bribe the tribute gatherers so heavily that sometimes they had to pay 3 times the value of the tribute of the 10th part, so as to secure their tenure. Now they have a security they never before enjoyed. The people are content, the army is strong, they have nothing to fear either within our boundaries or from foreigners. They have themselves to fear, Ra-Ab. A man can no longer hold authority unless it continues to be justified in his own person. I can understand how great a change this is, perhaps even more vividly than you. I used to think that because I was the son of Pharaoh, I did not have to observe the laws as did other people. I thought the gods had already made their choice by assigning me to such a birthright. I did not have to work for my position. I did not have to make any effort to be worthy of it. I was Senusert, the prince. You stripped me of that false strength and made me grow strong in myself. It was only to Senusert, the boy, that you gave love and trust and friendship. It made no difference to you from whose loins I sprang. Senusert was the name of a friend or of an enemy, and it would not be enhanced by any title which was justified only by temporal position. A warrior who believes in his invincibility only because he has a spear, while the enemy is unarmed, will always resent the order which bids him fight with bare hands. In time the warrior may become grateful for that order, but not before he has learned the strength of his own muscles. The weak man who knows that he cannot stand alone will always hate the man who exposed his weakness. That is why some of the nobles hate my father, and hate the eyes of Horus, who gave him the crook and flail. They can no longer say, "These lands will belong to my son because he's my son," for now they must add, "if he proves himself worthy to administer them." They must question not only their own integrity, but that of their heirs, and worse than that, Ra-Ab, they must permit their own authority to be questioned. And only a wise man can, with composure, allow that to happen. There have been a few instances when Amenemhet has had to show the power of the flail. Men who in the early days of the reign owned great estates which they had held for several generations now find themselves reduced to the rank of a field worker. Only a wise man would have been able to say, "Pharaoh is just, for my people are happier under their new master, and the watchers do not condemn the wise." You think that the dissatisfied faction with Senusert to become co-ruler in your stead? You think that the dissatisfied faction wish Senusert to become co-ruler in your stead? Why? Do you think there is anything in his character which justifies their belief that he is venal? He is not corrupt, of that I feel sure, but he has not had the special training necessary to make him invulnerable to other men's opinion. He is sensitive to criticism, and so he cannot hope to remain impervious either to flattery or to the reverence in which Pharaoh is held. It would be natural for a young man to wish more lavish entertainments than are at present to be found at court, for even the most loyal in the royal city are disappointed that my father shares so few pleasures with them. I am sure that Senusert has a warm nature which will respond to affection even when it is superficial. He would never inquire closely into the conduct of a friend's estate. He would forget the flail, until in time the crook also had lost its power. They will laugh with him and flatter him and use him, and in time perhaps destroy both Egypt and themselves. Have you forgotten that our laws decree that no one shall hold authority which is not justified in his own person? It would be difficult for the Watchers to lead a rising against a man so well liked by his people. People will always make excuses for their ruler unless they hate him. They hated my great-grandfather very bitterly, and that hatred doubled the number of your arrows. Corruption, which is masked by the smile of a kindly, though foolish ruler, is, by a long measure of time, more dangerous than the most bitter tyrant. The cruelty which the tyrant practices is a seed which comes quickly to maturity and poisons the sower, who must eat his own harvest. But the stupidities of a well-meaning fool sometimes lie fallow for many years, and like all plants of slow growth, they put down long roots which only arduous toil can clean from the field. In less than a year, Senusert, I said, you will have to leave the Oryx and return to your father. I know that Amenemhet has already chosen you to be his co-ruler, and he will declare you to the people on his 20th anniversary. He may still change that decision. He will never do that, for if he did so, it would be to deny the wisdom of the man who made him Pharaoh, Roydon, to whom he gave the title Lord of the Horizon. You will be Pharaoh, Senusert, not because you are the son of Amenemhet, but because you are the Pharaoh of the Watchers. In you they will see the truth for which they stand. To my intense emotion he knelt on one knee and took my hand between his, as though he were a servant, taking the oath of fealty. If I become Pharaoh, and all the people of Egypt are my children, I can never hope for a son who will give me such love and honor as I give to you and Mary, who are my father and my mother in Horus. This chapter ends here, the half-brothers, and the next chapter is Amulet of Ra. Have a lovely Sunday, the 14th of